It's very early. You must be a particularly ambitious group of students, because at this point in my college career, I wouldn't even consider an 8 a.m. class. That would have been about the furthest thing from my mind. So I appreciate you all getting up and being with us. I'm KariReichert. I'm in Human Resources, which we call People Services at NISC. I've been with NISC for about 7 years. And prior to that, I was at a law firm, and I'll talk a little bit about that and how that's impacted me. I am also affiliated with another organization. I do some work on the side with our university system in North Dakota, and so that's given me some additional experiences as well when it comes to talking about shared values. And I can tell you this, so this week's topic is shared values. And I'm actually really excited to talk about this, because this is something that if you had asked me 10 years ago, shared values, I probably would have rolled my eyes and said something about, buzzwords in a business journal that weren't very meaningful. But my experiences have changed that, and I think working at NISC has changed that. So what are the objectives? What are we going to talk about this week? I think there's 5 questions, or 5 general questions we want to talk about. First of all, just the basic, what are shared values? Why are they important? How do we identify them? How do we define them? And how do we align them within the organization? So these are the things we'll talk about both today and Thursday. And more than anything, though, these are kind of the subsets. I really just want you to think about how values play a role in the organization and how they're going to impact your career. And again, like I said, I think I was pretty naive when I went into the workforce, thinking that all companies were about the same, and it really didn't make a big difference. And it wasn't until I came to NISC that I really realized that. Let me explain that a little bit. So I started practicing law in Fargo at a local law firm, and great people, really great people. And I don't know when it was that I realized that, maybe this isn't quite the place for me. And I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Like I said, the people I worked with were very competent. But I had gone to school at a law school that was pretty, I'm going to say, it was theoretical maybe. We didn't have a lot of hands-on practical experience. We didn't learn how to write complaints. I'd never seen one. Graduated law school without ever having seen a written complaint or any kind of pleading that we would file in court. So I needed some guidance and mentorship. But the structure of the organization was a partnership. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with law firms, but it's a partnership where the partners each generate their own receipts through their clients and their files. And it all goes into they have a salary, and then the rest of it goes into a pool that they divvy up at the end of the year. And they also hire some people like I was, associates, to help get them there. But it's a little different in that the pool there, not all partnerships work the same, but the pool there was divvied up based on your individual receipts. So if you brought in $300,000, and that was 5% of the overall pool, you can probably get 5% back out of that pool. And you can imagine the way the resulting kind of effect that would have on people's incentives, right? If somebody gave work to me as an associate, they weren't bringing in those receipts, so they weren't going to get credit for that. I might get credit for it in the little associate pool they've made for us, but they weren't going to get credit. So there was really no incentive to share work, which also meant there was not a huge incentive to mentor others. And so it was kind of a sink or swim, figured out for yourself environment, which I think is good for some people. But I was quickly realizing I really liked working with people. I managed to get myself on the committee that organized the holiday party and the retreats, and so I was doing some event planning. And I developed relationships with other staff people. But at the end of the day, once a month, they'd pass around a sheet of paper that said, here's what your hours were, here's what your receipts were, here's what we had to write off because you took too much time doing it, which is a whole other issue, right? Do you want to do the right thing, make sure you do the job really well? Or do you want to be able to at least bring in the receipts? Because sometimes a client will call in and say, why did this take you 6 hours? Well, he said, well, I was trying to do a good job. They're not always willing to pay for it. So you have write-offs every month. And at the end of the year, you get another piece of paper that was your profitability statement. Here's what we paid you. Here's what you brought in. Here's your profitability. And for me, personally, I found that to be highly demotivating, that I was boiled down to a number on a sheet of paper. Another thing I saw was that not everyone practiced law in the same way. There were some people who were also litigators. I was doing some litigation. There were some people who were litigators who would, it was their responsibility to advocate for their clients. Their client would come in, as clients often do, with a very unreasonable position, and they were going to pay whatever it cost to prove their point, right? The price of principle, we called it. And some attorneys jump on that, yep, whatever it costs, and they'll send out terse letters, sometimes one-sentence letters, right? A little aggressive, threatening kinds of letters. And it can be effective. Clients read those kinds of letters and get nervous. Other lawyers, kind of blow them off. But sometimes those are effective tactics. If you really want to, intimidate someone, get them to settle for something less than they may have wanted. So there were people that had those kind of tactics, legitimate strategy. That wasn't me. I mean, my thought was, how can I do this effectively and not run up a large tab for the client, shooting letters back and forth? And how can we get to a resolution quickly? That was just the approach that I personally preferred. I'm not exactly a confrontational type of person. And I used to be competitive, and apparently not so much anymore. So there were also differences in billing practices. And again, so every lawyer we have our code of ethics or professional responsibility. Funny side note, before you can be a lawyer, you have to pass a test. It's an ethics test. It's called the Multi-State Professional Responsibility Exam. And the running joke among law students, it's a 50-question exam. You have, I think, 2 hours to complete it. And the running joke is, it's always the second most ethical answer. That's the right one. Because ethics are so gray, it's always kind of a crapshoot. And it's surprising that people don't pass this thing. And they've set it up that way. It is a pretty difficult exam. But it's always the second most ethical answer. Anyway, so we have this code of responsibility that's supposed to guide all we do. So we have boundaries. But within those boundaries, you do have some room to move. And like I said, billing practices differ. And I won't get into the details of that, but one example would be a criminal attorney who charges a flat rate. So I don't know if, hopefully none of you have had this situation, but maybe have had some friends. You go in, you pay, say it's a DUI, I've got a $3,000 retainer. If your attorney can resolve that with the prosecutor with a half-hour phone call, they keep all the money. If they have to go to trial and it takes them a month, they have to bill, 400 hours to the file, they only get that amount of money. And so for me, I had a hard time with that personally because you flat rate things. So it's a wash, but for that individual client, it wasn't, right? For you as the attorney, it's a wash in the end, but for that individual person, it wasn't quite right. Others billed by the hour, and practices varied there as well. But what I saw was not consistent. It was an environment that was not consistent, and it didn't occur to me at any point that we didn't have shared values. We didn't all agree on how we were going to practice law. And that was something that, I knew I wasn't quite happy in that environment, but it never occurred to me that that was why. And again, this is not to say that there was anything wrong with what anyone was doing. It was just that people were doing it differently. And for me, I found it at times deflating, when you were asked to do something in a way that you didn't really feel was the right way. And discouraging when you saw people make a lot of money, right? The reward. Money can tell you a lot about people's values, right? Where they put their money. And when the rewards went to people whose practices I didn't feel were quite right, it was very discouraging. And so, had we all been on the same page, probably would have been a different environment. And I didn't realize that until I got to NISC, where we have shared values. And what that means, of course, is that everyone agrees on how we're going to get stuff done. Now, I shouldn't say we totally agree, because at times it's not that simple. But but generally, we have these principles that can help us figure out how to act in a certain situation, and people actually follow them. And so you can expect people to act in a particular way. And so that made a big difference for me. And again, so whereas 10 years ago I would have kind of dismissed it as corporate fluff, I think that there's a lot to be said for values. And so that's the one takeaway I hope that each of you has is that you think about how values can impact an organization, but also your experience with that organization. And so I think I really want to get you guys talking a little bit because I don't have enough material to lecture the whole day. But that's probably a good thing because you're going to learn more from each other than me, more than likely anyway. So I think culture, values, I think companies are little microcosms of culture in their own right. They've all got their own culture. So we can observe things by looking at the way people act. You can observe and guess what their values may be. Now, the law firm I was at, I would argue, if they had a shared value statement, what might have been on it? You might have had something like, well, let's see, it was kind of sink or swim. So let's say empowerment, right? Is that a good value that might reflect the environment where you're expected to just kind of figure it out? So let's say empowerment. Relationships, you've got to find your own clients. So we're going to value your relationships. That might be another value they might select. Individual performance, right? Hard work. They work lots of long hours. Those are all things that they might have talked about. And what's interesting about that is none of those are bad things in and of themselves, right? But there is a question of alignment. And I think one of the things that we're prone to talking about is good culture and bad culture. I'm sure you've heard these phrases a lot. Oh, that company has a great culture. That place has a great culture. Well, why is it great? The law firm I was at didn't have a bad culture. It just wasn't the culture for me. It was the values that I value relationships too. But the way that they relationships was not what mattered to me. My relationships with my client needed to be meaningful in a different way. There, it was really just about the bottom line, making sure that that wasn't quite how I would define relationships.
Can I swap out your mic real quick here? Sorry about that.
Oh, cool.
Thank you very much.
So one of the things that I think is really important as we talk about culture, or when we talk about values even, is that we don't talk about good and bad. It's not a normative assessment. It's really just about it's really about alignment. And let me show, so when I was in college, I went to school at the University of Minnesota, lived in St. Paul, and I worked at a spirits store, is that what we'll call it? And we had a wine guy who did all the buying of wine, and he was no sommelier, but he had a lot of, he knew what he was doing, and it was a big store, and I had a special occasion coming up, and so I picked up, I went over and I was reading the back labels, right, and oh, this one looks fancy, and I'm thinking like, hey Tom, is this a good wine? And he looked at me, and I was kind of expecting him to say, something pompous about hints of blackberries and spice. And he said, well, what do you like? Because really, a good wine is a wine you like. And we continued to have a conversation then, about, people who buy wine in a box, right? And he said, Kari, it's just a good wine is a wine that you like. And so as we talk about good and bad culture, I think it's important to say that we have, or I think it's important that we're careful not to describe something as a good culture or bad culture. It's more or less one that you like. One that is aligned with your values. And I think some organizations have a strong alignment of values. And so this is where I say strong and weak, I think, are better terms to describe culture. So the organization I was at previously, this law firm, everyone's kind of their own little player. I would say it has a weak culture, right? The values weren't in alignment. People were kind of doing their own thing. To the extent we had values, I can kind of identify them and describe them, but it wasn't a real strong culture. There wasn't universal consensus or agreement on how we were going to do things. Meanwhile, you have some organizations that have strong culture. Now, it still may not be the kind that you'd like to work in, but it's a strong culture where everyone pretty much agrees on the way we're going to do things. So that's just a quick note as we continue over the next couple days talking about culture. But again, to get you guys talking, let me just ask a question. Stepping back, big picture. Company as a microcosm. Let's talk about a bigger picture. So, who's been to a foreign country? Okay, where have you been?
Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, Australia, all over.
Okay, let's pick one that we're kind of familiar with, because I'm not that familiar with those. But what kinds of differences culturally have you noticed?
It's illegal to chew gum in Singapore.
I'm
Worried about the littering and spitting on the sidewalk, and it's a crime there.
Okay, so what sort of value? So, having observed that behavior, what sort of value do you suppose that reflects?
Appearance of the city, they're concerned about that. That's what that law prevents or obtains.
Yeah. Okay, so I saw lots of hands. We have lots of travelers here. Anyone else? Yes.
I went to
Okay, and yeah, so what sorts of differences did you observe in Jamaica?
They seem to have a lot of carefree attitude.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, how many? What do they always say? It was just the most. It was. I can't remember what the phrase that is. No problem, right? They say no
Yeah,
problem all
yeah,
the time.
they say
Yeah,
that.
no problem all the time. And so, what sort of a value does that reflect?
Carefree. They try to sell them a lot of things on the.
Well, so what I found interesting, going from, of course, you go from your nice resort to the airport, right? And you see people living in kind of shanties, kind of makeshift housing.
They hardly stop for each other on the roads.
It's crazy. But yet this attitude of optimism, and I noticed that as well, and I found that, I really appreciated that. Anybody else? Oh, sure can. Okay, yeah. Canada. Perfect example, okay.
More specifically Toronto area. At first it didn't seem different than the United States, but I don't know, I wasn't really paying attention to the people.
Yeah.
Just kind of going for it. Just kind of seeing stuff.
So what do we know about the government in Canada? What do we know about healthcare? Say that again?
Socialism.
Socialism. Okay, how about education? Socialism. So this is kind of interesting because we now have a political debate going on, and we have two candidates. One's the socialist, and we one on the other end of the spectrum, right? The ultimate capitalist. What was that?
Murder.
Okay. So think about that for a minute. What does that tell you about the values in Canada? I mean, because they have a democratic government, right? Elected officials are making these decisions, have decided we're going to have
Shared.
healthcare, we're going to have education. What does that tell you about their culture?
Everything's shared. Everyone gets an opportunity to have what everyone else has.
Yeah, there's and there's a sense of community, I would say. How does that differ from the United States?
You get
And what value does that reflect? Or what?
capitalism.
Individualism, right? You have the right to choose. Yeah, you're expected to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. The American dream. In fact, we have all sorts of mythology around this, right? The agrarian myth of the farmer who's the hardworking. I mean, the United States has. Now, so I ask, is that bad? So the other interesting thing I think about that is does the United States have a strong culture or a weak culture? I mean, are those values that everybody accepts?
100% a country. that
Right.
agree with it.
Yeah, right. And that's why I find this election so interesting, because they couldn't be.
Everyone's so different.
You've got some very, very opposite ends of the spectrum. And my point in asking these questions is just to say that I think by observing some of the behaviors, some of the choices that people make, you can learn a lot about their values. And so, because, this is kind of a theme. So the book today, the chapter we asked everyone to read was called "Actions Speak Louder Than Anything Else," and this quote is attributed to Ralph Waldo Emerson. I'm not quite sure he said it this way, but in a nutshell, your actions are talking so loud I can't hear what you're saying. Is what the the quote is, and I think that's kind of a theme through this that is really important. Is probably, in addition to just thinking about culture and values in the workplace, probably the biggest takeaway is what you see is so much more important than what people are saying. And and so to talk about a particular organization, it's timely. I think I can make this work. Share a video, and I apologize, I wasn't able to embed this, but I think this should work. And I'm really hoping there's not going to be okay. Let's see. So you couldn't miss all the Football is Family commercials, right? I mean, you couldn't miss it if you watched. Who didn't watch the Super Bowl? Did anyone not watch? Wow. Okay. Good for you. Everyone. I myself got sucked in. My son is a raging Broncos fan. How do I go? Okay, from current slide. Okay. So that is that is an example of one of some of the commercials that you may have seen. So let me ask you, based on what you know about the NFL, is this consistent with the values you've seen? Let me step back. Based on what you've seen in the NFL, what would you expect their values to be? Okay, let's watch another one. Oh. Oh no. Not able to get it. So,
Guess it depends on the thing.
yeah.
What you're gonna play.
Can you move your mouse and click on the video?
You mean, no, it just goes to the next slide. It says it's playing though. Let me see if I've got the, no, I don't. So, as everyone, and most of you may have already seen this. So this is Odell Beckham laying out another player, right? So the Panthers played the Giants at the end of last year. What's his name, Josh Norman? And so there's all this taunting going back and forth, right? Have most of you seen this hit? So obviously NFL's cracking down on some of these blindsiding hits, some of these helmet-to-helmet hits. And what does he do? But he runs in. He's an offensive player. No reason to be involved here. Runs in and just drills this other guy in the head. And it results in a fight. Fight breaks out. A lot of people run on the field, and took a while to calm things down. And there were, I think he had 2 unnecessary roughness penalties in that game. And there was a lot of debate, should he have been kicked out right then and there? And everyone says, well, Josh Norman was instigating it, right? He was threatening him or making some sort of comments that were instigating this type of behavior. And I believe Josh Norman was also penalized and fined as part of this game. And ultimately, the league did decide to suspend him. 1 game, no pay, which is about, I think, cost him about $55,000. Anyone know how much he makes in a season? Yeah, about $2.6 million. So, oh darn, I've only going to have $2.5 million to work with this year. Really not a huge loss for Mr. Beckham. But I think the more interesting thing is, do you know what happened the next day? He's named to the Pro Bowl. And he's not only, now this is all, who votes on Pro Bowl? The fans. And now they've got this new format where they have these legend captains. So this year it's Jerry Rice and you guys know way more about this than I do. So so they get to kind of do the pick right off the line. They get to pick who they want. And they have a current player assigned with them. And so guess who is co-captain of a Pro Bowl team? Odell Beckham. So he co-captains a Pro Bowl team after he was just suspended for a game, which is about as stiff a sentence as I've really seen, as most of us I think have seen the NFL dole out. And so what does that tell us about their values?
Performance over character.
Yeah, so they value performance. And so again, and I think in answering that question, I'm sure you've all seen shared value statements from different organizations. They never have negative words, right? They never have, things like, nothing that would support unethical behavior, right? They're always positive things. So I think that's one, performance, right? What other values would you expect the NFL to have on their value statement?
Sportsmanship.
Yep, right. Yep, so they did something about this, right? They didn't just let it go. They did something about it. So let's talk about one more thing. Has anyone seen the Frontline documentary called League of Denial? If you haven't, this is really, really interesting. And you could say it's biased. I don't know if there's any football players here. My son is dying to play football. It's the only thing I've seen him get really excited about, so this is killing me. But I think most of you are probably familiar with the story. Has anyone seen Concussion, the movie? I have not, and I'm kind of excited to. So what happens is back in, I think, 2002, this doctor who's Bennett Amalu, he works for the medical examiner's office in Pittsburgh. And he's called in to do an autopsy, and he has no idea who this guy is. He turns out to be a legendary Pittsburgh Steeler player named Mike Webster. And he's going through the autopsy, and he notices a few things. You know, the body looks much older than the age that it should, and it's quite sad. He had really his body was really just falling apart, literally. He was using duct tape to hold. I mean, it was a bad deal. Anyway, Dr. Amalu decides to fix or put in formula the brain and runs tests on it and finds presence of this protein called tau, and which is something that they've previously observed in boxers who have had lots of head injuries. It also looks similar to people who have dementia, and some of those corresponding symptoms like depression, aggression, aggressive behavior. And this sort of launches a series of events where they start building a case, and he works with a physician who studies dementia patients and the brains of people who have dementia. And they kind of work together to procure additional brains of players who have passed away. And as they do this, they continue to find evidence of this CTE. It's chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which basically means that you've had hit after hit after hit after hit, and your brain is filled with this protein that makes it difficult for it to work and function well. Mike Webster was living on Ritalin before he died, trying to just make it through the day. And if you've watched some of the interviews with him, he can't even, mid-sentence, loses track of what he's saying. It's quite sad. But anyway, so the NFL, this is this growing crisis. So it starts in 2002 and builds and builds and builds, and the NFL is kind of denying it. And I'd really recommend watching the whole thing. But as of last September, they have identified, I think they've looked at 87 former NFL players, and I believe 80 of them have had evidence of CTE. And they're also, the research was also showing that it's not just the concussions. Because we all watch for concussions, right? Pull them out of the game, observe them. So the NFL's done that. They said, okay, we're going to pull people out. They can't come back on if they've had evidence of a concussion. But unfortunately, the research is showing that it's the hit after hit after hit. I believe the way that Dr. Amalu described it for Mr. Webster was it amounted to the equivalent of 25,000 car accidents. So it's the constant injury to the brain. And anyway, so as all this is going on, the players' union, or well, I guess it's the retired players, get together and file a class action lawsuit against the NFL. And it was settled for $765 million a couple of years ago. But the trouble isn't over. This is an ongoing problem. And so based on the fact that, this is 2002 this starts, right? And so they're commissioning their own studies that say everything's fine. Now they're kind of backed off that a little bit. So this is 14 years ago. And I don't know how many hard hits you guys all saw. How many unnecessary roughness penalties were there in the Super Bowl, right? It was pretty surprising. And they know they've got this problem. So again, knowing that their values are going to be positive words, what types of values does the NFL have?
Sorry. Is there a computer button?
So I'm going to go back just real quickly to this video we watched with the young ladies. Any idea why I picked the one with the young ladies? So since 2000, over 80 players have been arrested for domestic violence. And that's just, we know that the statistics go on. And so, again, I'm not trying to criticize the NFL at all. I'm just saying that I think you can observe a lot about an organization's values by watching how they behave and the choices that they make. So, I've got my stats here. Anyway, if anyone is interested, the Frontline documentary is exceptionally interesting. It's available. It's free on PBS. So, One of the things that's interesting, if you go to the PBS website, they've got all sorts of data on what's going on, but they've also got some responses from players. And I apologize, this is a little bit small print, but this is how the players are responding, and I got Bill Belichick on there as well. So Tom Brady's response, I don't really care. Aaron Rodgers, yep, I know. It's an assumed risk, I know it could happen. Ray Rice, yep, I know. It might happen, but that's the risk I'm willing to take. This one I think is interesting. We can change the policies, but we can't change the culture. One of the things that you see throughout the documentary is that these players want to get back out there. They lie to their medical doctors on the team. They want to get back on the field. And, Bill Belichick just passes the buck. No big surprise there. I'm sorry if there's any Patriots fans here. But he just says, yeah, that's really up to the doctors. My team's got to be healthy. What I find is interesting about that statement is they've got to be healthy now. Evidence of CTE doesn't show up for about 8 to 10 years after these series of traumatic incidents. So your guy might look healthy today. He might be acting, walking, talking just fine. But really, what is the long-term impact? So I think there's kind of I care about my healthy team, but do I really care about my players? And that's just an observation on my part. So but seeing this, would you say the NFL has a strong culture or a weak culture? So let's assume the values are what they are based on the behavior we've seen. And this is how the individual employees feel about it. Strong culture, weak culture.
They're buying into it, they're playing.
Yeah, they're good with it. I would say that they have a strong culture. So I think it's interesting. So here are the NFL's actual shared values. Respect. I don't see any real, and they do have additional descriptions. I've just kind of truncated them here. I don't see respect in all cases. Now, and don't get me wrong, there are some shining examples of respectful individuals in the organization. I don't think it's consistent. Integrity, responsibility to team, resiliency. Yeah, you'd think sportsmanship would be one. But you don't see things like safety. Safety is not a value. Resiliency, yeah, they get right back in, right? They're meeting that value. Responsibility to team, they seem to have each other's backs. You saw them all. If you'd seen the clip, they all get up and run in when this Beckham Norman thing's going on.
I might put sportsmanship under respect.
Yeah. Actually, and it's funny, the description, I should pull up their website. The description, I think, actually, yeah. Here's what the rest of that is. I probably should have added it. In a game of X's and O's, we embrace all people for who they are, regardless of status, title, or background. We celebrate diverse opinions and perspectives. We honor hard work and commitment. Every contribution makes us better. It's not about sportsmanship, right?
Right.
It's about inclusion. So it's interesting. That's an interesting thing because I think it points out something that we'll talk about more on Thursday, which is words are words, but they don't always mean the same thing to everybody. And you might think that respect means what you think it does to you, when in fact it means something different to the organization. And so you have to dig deeper than just the values and the words that you see. So these are the values, and I think that generally speaking, what I've seen is in alignment with that. At least, and respect would have been the integrity is where they get into the sportsmanship, I believe. They say, we do the right thing when no one is looking. Ouch. And even if it's unpopular when they are looking, we demand accountability and expect fair play. So they do cover sportsmanship. Fair enough. So this I found to be interesting because Bob Costas obviously has to. He works for these guys. He works for CBS, I think, but he actually, he called it in a probably this was just a couple days ago or a couple weeks ago. He called it in a very direct way, and said it's a little much to take while watching a game that you are constantly bombarded with football is family commercials. Yeah, that's right. The first thing that I think of when I hear about 25% to 30% by the NFL's own admission of its players having cognitive difficulties is football is family. And so he's referring to, he does go on to talk about some of the off-field incidents that have been out there, but But he calls it out and says, does this organization really align with its values? And that's, that is actually a whole different discussion, and I think is probably an important one. And that is, there's a lot of off the field conduct that goes on, and there are actually some states that say that an employer cannot take action against you for conduct outside of the workplace. And so there are some protections. There's limitations on that, but that's a whole other question about whether or not that is relevant. For example, if we're recruiting, can I look at your Facebook page and see what you're doing on the side? Should I be? Now there is hair on that, but I think it's important to note that, as we talk about values, your core values are core, right? They're all the time. And so being consistent with that, I think is important. I think the NFL does consider off-the-field conduct, right? We saw what happened to Adrian Peterson, Ray Rice. Is it Ray Rice? So we know that they are willing to address off-field conduct. But it isn't, it's important to be who you are at all times. So did everyone have a chance, and I apologize, the article came out late, but did everyone have a chance to look at the Amazon article? No? Okay. So is anyone familiar with the situation that's going on with Amazon? Or kind of what came out last year? Okay, I think what we might do then is give you guys a chance to read that, and we'll talk about it on Thursday. So nothing major is going on with Amazon. Don't worry, you're still getting your books or whatever. But there was late last year, there was kind of I don't want to call it an expose in the New York Times about Amazon and the culture that they foster. So we will come back to that on Thursday. So I'm going to have you guys go through a little breakout exercise, kind of pair up. So maybe it probably makes sense to turn around with the person behind you based on the way you're sitting. And I'm going to have you do something, but before we do that, let's talk about values. Did anyone read the Lencioni article? Okay, well, I'll summarize it for you. There are some pieces in there that there's more to it, but this is one takeaway. And I think this is an important distinction to make when we talk about values. So when we talk about shared values, we're talking about core values, right? The things that run deep, they don't change on the field, off the field. They're core values. For an organization, that means that they run through everything. They don't change over time. Some things do, but core values should never change. You also have aspirational values. So if you sit down and as an organization, and this is kind of discussed in the article, so what are the values of this company? And the example in the article was, well, a sense of urgency. And the writer says, well, is that really true? Do your employees have a sense of urgency? And it turned out they didn't. He just thought they should. And so aspirational values are things that we would like to see in our organization or in the people that we work with, but we don't have them now. And so I think it wouldn't seem like it's a difficult distinction to make, but I think at times we like to think of ourselves a little bit differently than we actually are. So I think you just got to be careful. Aspirational values are things that we aspire to be, not necessarily what we actually are. We have accidental values, and these are things that crop up in an organization just by the people who are involved. So the example in the article is an organization that's a retail clothing outlet in San Francisco. And it turned out that all of their employees were kind of trendy hipsters who like to wear black clothing and, I suppose, hang out at coffee shops and, do what hipsters do. And that sort of became a value for them. And it really wasn't intentional. I think that the other thing I would say about this is confusing that with, sometimes people think that culture is about what you see in the office. So we got, so in Missouri, we've got a ping pong table that gets used all the time. We also have a disc golf field outside. People use that. People go outside and walk. So we have some kind of perky kinds of things around the office, but they really aren't values. I think another example would be if you ask NISC employees what they like, they're going to tell you, I think all of them, hands down, what do you like about NISC? One of the first things they will say is flexibility. We allow people it's kind of, we have a lot of flexible work arrangements. People can work from home. We have a number of virtuals. But is flexibility really of value? I think it's something we see because of what we allow, and it probably more than anything would reflect integrity and this notion that we trust you to get the work done, empowerment. You get the work done whenever you get it done. We trust you. But it's not really a value. Flexibility itself is not a value. So if you see an organization that has a value like work-life balance, I would call that out over a 50-year time horizon. I'm not sure that that's something that will always be a value for an organization, perhaps. But I think these are sometimes things that reflect where the employees are at a particular moment. And right now, this is sort of a trend we've been seeing. So those are accidental values, and they're not necessarily core. And then the permission to play values. So the example in the article that I think is really interesting is he's talking to a CEO who says, well, yeah, integrity is a value. We would never hire someone who lied in their resume. And the writer kind of says, well, really? I mean, who would, right? Who would hire someone who lied on their resume? That's just a basic expectation of everybody here. That is not the integrity we're talking about as a core value. So these are just kind of the minimums, you know. You can't show up for work 2-3 hours late, you know. I mean, so kind of some of the basics. That doesn't necessarily mean that you've got a high level of integrity just because you show up on time. These are just kind of the basic things. Also want to differentiate core values between, again, the strategies or practices. The example that's given, and totally applicable here at a university, is academic freedom as a core value for a university, right? Faculty. But the practice around that is tenure. Is everyone familiar with tenure? This is something that drives me nuts. I have to say, sitting on our board of higher ed, tenure drives me crazy because in the regular world, right, for all of us, we don't have any kind of contracts for our jobs. As we say at NISC, I've got to earn it every day. I could be fired at any moment for pretty much any reason, just not an illegal one. And so I think, so tenure is this very foreign concept. And it was actually raised recently by our faculty advisor. And we had kind of a heated discussion about the merits of tenure. In fact, the state of Wisconsin actually said tenure is gone. It's a very expensive proposition, right? Because once you get somebody in the organization, you've kind of given them tenure, they can kind of stay. And you got to work a lot harder, I think, to monitor for quality. Now, if you have the right people, that's not a problem. But you are kind of you're making a long-term commitment to an employee. And so tenure is being questioned. There's a lot of discussion in higher education about tenure as a practice. But itself is not a value. The value it's preserving or attempting to preserve is academic freedom. And in fact, so the exchange that I had with our faculty advisor was kind of interesting. He said, well, so let me give you an example, Kari. We have to have tenure because what if I disagree with my boss? He could fire me. I mean, what if I stand up at a department meeting and I say X, Y, or Z and he doesn't agree with me, he could fire me. I said, my boss could fire me any day for not agreeing with me. I mean, what do you mean? That is, of course you can be fired. So academic freedom, to me, says you can't be fired for your intellectual views, the research you're conducting, if it's not popular or not in line with some of the other, the leadership of the institution. And so there's a difference between the practice and the value. And so I thought that was a really good example. So considering all of this, I've got a breakout exercise for you guys to engage in. And I assume everyone's been here for 4 years? No. How long?
We're not even full year yet.
Okay. And you'll want to partner with somebody. So is everyone here familiar with the University of UMary's Statement of Shared Values? Everybody? Everyone can? Okay, I was kind of hoping you might not be. But that's okay, because I want you to kind of set that aside. And I want you to get together and talk about and identify 3 values, core values that you see embodied in things like the decisions that are made, the policies you have. A good time to identify values is when you have some sort of a crisis or a problem. You can see where people's values are, right, and how they handle things. The interactions you've had with your peers, other students, your faculty, decisions made by leadership. Tell me what the 3 values are that you see, core values that underlie everything that goes on this campus. And so if you want to partner up with someone behind you and just take 5 to 10 minutes. If you need longer, we can go 10. But pick 3. Try to, again, set aside the things that you've seen. And I'm kind of curious what you'll come up with. Or I'm sorry, set aside what you've been told is on the list, right? Focus on what you've seen. You can hear me okay?
Yeah. No, my first mic, I've been having some interference problems with it. Like the last 2 times I've recorded, I put it on, all of a sudden it's like, I'm like, I gotta just make a decision here.
So is this all your equipment?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I have about a $10,000 podcast studio too.
Are you here on behalf of Mary or us? Oh, thank you. Yeah. Good. So you can edit this to make it sound really good.
That's why I wanted, we don't know what we're gonna do with the video yet. I think it's just to capture, what's there. So I have the boom mic on there so that I swing it over to capture their questions.
Well, Vern keeps saying, how are we going to use this in onboarding? And I keep, the stories are the best part.
Yeah.
Versus kind of even this class, and now with the feedback we've had, I've kind of tried to scale back from anything NISC focused, because the feedback has kind of been, we don't want to be a sales pitch,
Well, this is excellent though. Like this is on target.
Okay.
And it's really good.
Well, yeah, oh, thanks. I know, just and also in reading some of it, my assignment's a little bit harder, I think, than some of the other ones they've had. But
That's okay.
this is a good group. I'm glad people are staying with it.
They have them engaged. And I look around the room to see, are they
I got a sleeper next to you.
Yeah. And then, but it's,
Okay.
I thought it was really relevant. I mean, it's really timely.
Well, I
It's
think,
interesting because, you are talking about NISC too, but you're also,
Yeah.
you're saying, because they have to make those decisions when they go on to the workforce. So,
well, and yours was the most insightful point. Saying it was the word respect me, right?
right.
Because people don't agree on words.
Well, that's what I think is, that's what I love about this, is that I look at that and I went to sportsmanship. And then I look at like, I should have picked integrity, but I immediately think respect because, it was really good because it makes you think. And then when you said, look, words don't mean the same thing.
Oh yeah, we'll talk a lot about that on Thursday because it's huge, and that was kind of my point. I don't think any company has a bad, and Amazon's a great example. If you look at their values, they're all good.
Yeah.
But you look at the culture that results. I wouldn't fit there. Some people will. I wouldn't. But
Exactly. So thank you for letting me.
oh yeah. No problem. Gotta catch my thoughts anyway.
Well, I think too that, even with the onboarding, I don't see videos, I don't know if they're creative enough in themselves to do that, but something, I would like to see like today's series that we can sit down and take the values of the stories that are coming out of here and reproduce them, and sit down and get a really clean copy and then put it with visuals and images.
Well, and I'm sure we're going to talk to you about our onboarding project that we're kind of looking at. I mean, I would, and that's kind of one of the things Jasper and I talked about is I would love to, hire out some help on that. And because there's a lot of stuff on the site that I want to talk through. Just like B-roll kinds of stuff, or even the editing, putting stuff together. I have this very clear vision of what I think would be effective. Because I think our onboarding needs to be, our plan right now is to do one full day. The morning would be substantive history, vision, mission, values. The afternoon would be logistics. And then every Friday for the next how long, you'd have a morning in a small group like this talking about different things. And but the problem is the organization is so complex. All the things that go on, how they all fit together, that's what we've been struggling. I can talk to you about the history, no problem. But how does this stuff fit together? The implementers do what? And
How do
then,
you take different personalities and put them into the puzzle effectively?
yeah. And the other thing that Vern really wants us to communicate for people is what are their opportunities. So they start here, where else can they go? And I think I've always envisioned having an org chart where you could go click on people. And you click on the manager at E&O, and she might even talk about the philosophy of hiring. And then you go talk to the individual person who might talk about the product they're installing or a day in the life of me. And so you could go and on your own explore, like, what are all these people doing here?
Yeah, the other thing you might want to consider too is just strictly an audio podcast version, because audio is the only thing on the internet right now that does not require screen. So literally, it could be going for a walk, it could be driving somewhere, and
They could be, they could be earning points in our wellness program. So in your podcast, Tracy has that PBS type, or that public radio voice. Oh my gosh, I was like, remember those, the SNL skit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, she's that lady, it's amazing.
Yep, and I told her that. I said I could listen to her voice all day, you know. And so I said, and you know, and Wally and Vern were in the room. I said, there's something there, you know, and to produce that into a package, and that could be something else, you know, like even I said, you know, as we were talking that day, I said, what we need to do is we need to go out and I need to talk to the person. I need to go interview Mike Weber and about their going to Minnesota.
Yeah, right.
Get their story from their perspective.
And you could weave it in with members
Talk to
who are
the
happy.
receptionist about, you know, tell me about when the phone rings, what's going through your mind, you know, and capture those stories from their voice. And yes, you know, when you put a camera in front of someone, the story changes. When you just put a microphone and you have a microphone off to the side, people relax and you get
Right.
not that you don't have a camera, but people are a little more self-conscious on camera. And then a little more tight, but you just get them talking about what they do. And all of a sudden, if they get the microphones there, you just get solid gold. And that can be transcribed into text, whatever. And they can be put over slides, it can be put over interactions for people, maybe.
And so right now, I'll be really honest, we don't have the resources to get any of this done. And so that's why we're kind of, I mean,
Well, I
when,
talked with Jasper.
oh, you did?
We're going to still meet up and come over and just
good.
sit down with you guys. And
Good.
See if there's maybe a way that I can help you guys out.
Yeah.
And I have all the equipment and I have everything accessible. Happy to help if I can.
Yeah, I would. Oh, wait, what time is it? This is about the,
It's 5.
how late does this go?
They go till about 10 after quarter after. So you have about 20 minutes.
Okay. I won't, so,
Because what, so again, for fire, yeah, I was gonna say, with a fire person, once you know, I'm just saying, where, you know, I feel like other people might hear about the same thing. You worry about it, there. You know, I just, I feel like we just, that's my own other schools before.
so maybe,
I feel like it's not gonna help.
can I,
It's not gonna say, hey, you don't really have to say.
Just hit the off button
I would know.
on her, on the little box, on the
got it. All right.
I talked to him. And he's like, well, look into it. No, and then here comes his 2030 vision. Did I?
Okay. I think we're ready, and we have, looks like we have two, okay, so I think we've got about 5 different groups. So, start over here on the left. What 3 things, what 3 values, core values, have you observed in your time on campus?
Academic honesty.
And that's not going to be big enough, is it? Okay. Hospitality?
Yep.
How would you define that?
How they treat their special guests that come on. There's always some sort of high school event that's held out here.
Yeah.
How they treat them all here.
It's like an open campus.
Very welcoming. Academic honesty, how would we define that?
All the professors have always addressed, no plagiarism and do your own work. And
do it well, but they're also willing to help you do it well, so you can do it. So
Mhm.
pressure to.
Yeah. Yeah.
All the teachers keep like an open line of communication for whatever you may need.
And are these two kind of go hand in hand, or is this like campus specific? The community.
Now that you mention it, I guess it can go hand in hand.
Because when you use this word, I also think is there sort of a social responsibility of giving back, that sort of thing, or is that what did you guys talk about with this one? It was more the welcoming.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the back.
Really, community on there too.
Okay.
And, leadership is another one.
So does that so when you say community, does that mean something different than what they've previously?
Just kind of like maybe all the staff wanting to help the kids in different ways, whether it be a teacher or else just someone out there for financial aid reasons or anything along those lines.
Yep.
They all kind of have the same goal in mind.
And kind of going off of that, like we talked about, but not only the professors, but I know that a lot of the students find it easier to, if there is like a pod or a group that has a question on the class or on a project or whatever, they can all get together and create kind of one kind of group or trust within each other, and that kind of brings back that community, how easy it is to do that here.
Leadership? Is this everybody? How would you guys describe that?
Well, I think like what we talked about too, I know UMary is big on the leadership, the servant leadership, but I think when we first think about leadership as, for the times I've been here, I was an athlete here, and everything like that. Not only did the coaches, the teachers, and the professors, but a lot of the natural leadership that was shown through my teammates or else my classmates that was actually pretty easy to follow and was positive to follow, I think was a big core pillar that the university is really strong on, that I think a lot of people can utilize and use and see in the community of the campus.
Yep. Okay, one more. Do you guys have another one?
Oh yeah, we said integrity.
Integrity. Okay. And what does that mean to you here?
I guess you could kind of throw that in with some of the honesty aspect too, just
Yeah. Maybe and that's maybe a subset of integrity.
I think, again with that one, a lot of the feeling of maybe being humble or knowing that even though maybe some classes are smaller or some are, you don't need a big lecture hall or a big professor behind a huge podium to feel academic greatness and to feel a sense of positivity when you're in class. I think that's something that the university here is treasured.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of tempted to just pencil in humility as well, but we'll see what others had. So, okay.
We had prayer.
And that is one of the values, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we had like the pursuit of truth.
And that's.
We also had community.
And what was the last one? Integrity? Community. Okay. Next group. Did you guys?
Yeah, we had community too, and servant leadership, and then we also had service.
That's also one as well, right? Okay. And what is? I think service is pretty self-explanatory. Did you guys talk more about what that means?
Well, we just kind of talked about we have a day of service, and then I know for the business school, we have to do like 25 hours of community service.
Do you witness, whether it's servant leadership or service, in the interactions between one another? Yeah. And how did you define community?
During the brush fires, basically how everybody kind of rushed down here to try to do their best to protect the school.
Mm-hmm. Also this probably, right? Yeah. Okay. Do you guys have any that haven't been said?
No.
Really? Okay, so which did you pick?
We had service and hospitality. Oh, like looking to the future. Development.
Okay. I was going to write vision, so I'm glad you.
There you go.
Or is it development? What I mean.
I guess at this point it's a vision.
Okay.
Vision.
What does that mean? Is it from a student standpoint or the institution?
The institution, like we have our Vision 2030, and the idea is to just keep growing and developing.
Right. So it's not
to
living
make
in
it
the
better
present.
for our students.
So yeah. So it's you personally, career development, growth, educational growth, the institution. It's a common value. So how hard was it to come up with 3 values? Pretty easy?
They have written on every wall unless you walk down the hallway.
Well, you weren't supposed to pick those, unless you really. I mean, unless you really believe them. So help me understand which ones. What are the core values?
Hospitality, service.
Are there any that aren't up here?
Respect for others.
Respect's not up here. Okay, but I made you limit it, so I think that's fair.
Moderation.
Oh yeah. How's that one go? Because I think this would be hard in college. Do you guys? I mean, do you see this exemplified?
Like some things to do, but it's just kind of like also, it's not just like with alcohol, things like that. It's also with like.
I mean, sleep, caffeine,
Well, yeah,
food,
like,
exercise. I mean,
yeah, it's just like having a balanced life. I
yeah,
I do.
yeah.
I think along the lines of like all the different options that you have kind of feeds into moderation. You have all these different opportunities.
Right. Knowing your limits. You don't take 20 credits. Someone in here is doing that. I know it, right?
21.
You go. This is hard. So this is really hard because this, I tell you what, at our organization, this and this, our servant leaders, they'll be the last ones in the office. They'll be the first ones to volunteer. And there are times, Vern emails me Saturday morning at 6 a.m. and I'm going, Vern, I know this is you, and this is not one of our shared values, but it's one of those things where the commitment, when you have people who are here, I mean, you generally find people who are very committed to what they're doing. And it makes moderation very difficult. And so I would love to inject this at NISC because people are so committed. I remember I was talking to a guy in the lunchroom once, and I said, yeah, Brian, what are you doing this weekend? And he said, well, actually my wife's family's coming into town. We're having a reunion. I'm supposed to take the next couple days off. And I said, you're not? And he said, no, I really can't. And I said, well, Brian, you need to talk to your supervisor? I mean, you could take some time off. And he goes, oh, no, I just can't. I don't want the member to get behind schedule. So he works on conversions and getting new members live, so our customers. He said, I can't let the member get behind schedule. And so the commitment, the servant leadership, sometimes I think, now his heart's in the right place. I don't know the answer there. What should he have done? Hopefully there's a team lead who would have stepped in to help. Had he really, maybe he just didn't want to be with his in-laws. That's probably got more to do with it, now that I think about it. So it wasn't very difficult, and I hope it wasn't just because they're on the walls. I hope it's because this is what you actually see in practice. Are there any things here, is there anything that's missing from this list that you have seen that you think is core to everything in leadership, faculty, your colleagues? Anything missing?
Commitment.
Yeah. I'm just going to, and because you can't have too many, right? Some of these companies have like 14, 15. I'm like, I don't even know. I mean, it becomes at some point you can't list them all, right? So let me ask you, which of these things, so you all had choices in going to college. You all probably could have gone lots of different places. Public schools, schools out of state. Which of these things make the University of Mary unique? I think there's several, right? I mean, as universities go, as the other places you considered, what things make this institution unique? Yeah.
I'd say a mix between community and hospitality.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen hospitality on anyone's vision statement. I think that's really cool. Any other things that stand out as reasons why you would want to come here versus somewhere else? You just got a great scholarship. So is there anything lacking? So is there any other places you wanted to go where you said, boy, I really wish, I mean, so diversity's not here, right? And I can tell you, I just made a very public statement about diversity the other day in higher education, and how part of the reason I left the state for my education was because, as much as I love North Dakota, I wanted to try something new, right? Are there any things here that you think are lacking for you personally, right? But I tell you what, what's interesting about that, in retrospect, I probably would have given up something I valued like diversity for some of these other things. And I think that's, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12 things here, and you can't have it all. And so sometimes you have to pick. And so talk about alignment and aligning your personal values with the organization that you're going to. I also think it's important that you consider what these words mean. Like I said, they don't always mean the same thing to everybody. So I think it's really cool that you guys very quickly were able to come up with words that not only align with the actual words that you have on your values list, but also that you've seen on campus, because I think that's huge. And we'll talk more in a couple weeks. So I'm coming back. You guys are stuck with me another week to talk about engagement and satisfaction. And I can tell you that one of the hardest things from an engagement standpoint, and if you happen to look at the Collins article, I believe it was the Collins article, you're almost better off sometimes not having a value statement if you don't live by it. It can be very disengaging, and we can talk more about that in a couple weeks. But values matter, and it's really important that you see them. I mean, actions speak louder than everything else, right? So I'm going to look at the time here, 9:10, and you guys are usually 9:15. Is that right? Okay. So we will talk about why shared values next on Thursday. Then we'll save that. Talk about some different. Yeah. Okay. I think, and if everyone could read the Amazon article, we can start with that next week and just kind of we'll breeze through that pretty quickly. But as you read that, something to think about. Just how the values of Amazon, which they're kind of woven into that article, how they're reflected in the culture, and then of course whether you would like to work in that environment, and why not. And we'll start with that. We'll talk a little bit. I'll do a little more lecture on why shared values. We can talk about why they're important, but also something to think about as well. Just why values matter, and we'll have some more examples on Thursday then. So. Guess we're a little early. Sorry. I'm waiting for you to be mad at me, but I'm afraid that may not happen.